Taiwan holds presidential elections early next year in January, and the campaign for the top spot is becoming intense. Whoever takes control will have to manage an aggressive China, and that will have implications for peace and security for all Asia. This was underscored in last week's APEC summit in San Francisco. Much of the focus was on U.S. President Joe Biden's meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. But Taiwan's representative also met quietly with the American president and Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Taiwan's envoy welcomed Beijing's agreement to improve communications with the U.S. military.
Well, I think that I really think it was a good meeting. It was a good news that they resumed the military communications, and I think that it should help to reduce the tension between the United States and China, and it should increase the stability of Taiwan Strait.
Back in Taiwan, however, election drama suggests the possibility of rough waters ahead when it comes to any new president who must deal with the China threat. Days ago, the two opposition party candidates announced a joint ticket only to end up bickering over who would actually become president versus vice president if they won. Here's Ko Wen-jie, one of the candidates, and his take on the matter.
I still think it's necessary for the main opposition parties to have an alliance. We'll think of a way to find a strongest ticket to win the elections. That should be our goal. So we still hope to go on negotiating with the KMT, but they should not ask us to concede our votes.
Joining us is DW's James Chater in Taipei. James, can you tell us more about these two opposition parties and who these two guys are?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as we approach Taiwan's presidential election scheduled for January next year, we really have 3 or 4 main contenders. We have the ruling party, the DPP, but then we have 3 opposition candidates, 2 of which are now looking to form an opposition unified ticket. The first of those is Ko Wen-jie of the Taiwan People's Party, the TPP. He's the former mayor of Taipei. He's started this party relatively recently in 2019. And he's looking to team up with the main kind of established opposition party, the Kuomintang, or KMT, which is he's a party with a very steeped history in Taiwan. The reason why they want to team up is because for months now, opinion polls have suggested that Lai Ching-te, the ruling party, the DPP in Taiwan, would really be cruising to a victory if they didn't form this united ticket. So their main goal in trying to team up is to unseat the ruling party, but they've really hit rocky ground when it comes to deciding how exactly they're going to do that. We had this decision in the middle of last week where we heard that it was likely that they were going to be able to kind of find a way to deciding who was going to be the presidential candidate and who was going to take the vice presidential candidate position. But now it looks like those negotiations have come undone, and it really looks kind of increasingly difficult how they're going to manage to find a way to find that common ground to reach a decision on how they're going to go forward now.
So that's quite the campaign fiasco, and I guess it doesn't entirely inspire confidence on how ready either men are for the global diplomatic stage. Is that somehow an issue for Taiwanese voters? Is this how they're interpreting it?
Absolutely. Well, I think we've heard a lot of discussion in Taiwanese social media since these negotiations went underway about specifically how Ko Wen-jie went about those talks with the KMT. So when he came out of this negotiation later this weekend on Saturday, he basically said that in future he's not going to go into negotiations again with the KMT on his own. We saw these kind of negotiations take place with just 4 members, some of the kind of leading figures from the opposition party. And within Taiwan, that's really sparked a lot of debate. We've seen some senior analysts in the US really questioning whether he can be trusted to, in a high-stakes geopolitical situation which Taiwanese leaders have to engage with Chinese leaders, whether he'd be able to kind of meet that target and come across as a convincing leader. The other question that's really coming to the fore now is that we have this very acrimonious situation between the two opposition parties. And the question really is, even if they are able to form this joint ticket, whether they're going to be able to put those grievances aside. This has been a very sour process now about who is deciding who is going to be the presidential candidate and who's going to be the vice presidential candidate. If they, enter a coalition government, are they really going to be able to form that kind of harmonious government that Taiwan really needs as it faces this very complex geopolitical situation?
Right. And meanwhile, we have the party of President Tsai Ing-wen, the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. They already have a presidential candidate, but I understand that they just announced their vice presidential pick. Can you tell us more?
Absolutely. Well, the DPP, the ruling party in Taiwan, has had a relatively comparably smooth process in deciding who's going to be their candidates for president and vice president. The incumbent President Tsai Ing-wen cannot run again. She's reached the end of her term limits. The current Vice President Lai Ching-te is in place to be the presidential candidate. And today we had confirmation from the DPP that the current de facto ambassador to the US, Xiaobi Kim, is going to be the vice presidential candidate. Now, together they form a pretty formidable force because Xiao is someone who's respected an awful lot in Washington. She's been over there for about 3 or 4 years now and is credited with really raising Taiwan's profile in the US. The point that counts against them, though, is that Xiaobi Kim is someone who Beijing has already applied sanctions against. And so the question, very much a similar question to what we see with the current administration, is if they are to win and to enter office as a joint ticket, how are they going to be able to ease the tensions that are already at historically high levels with Beijing?
Very quickly now, often elections are actually focused on the domestic stuff, not the international stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's happening in Taiwan?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, with any threat like China, which is so big, really, it's difficult to kind of tease out what's related to that issue and also kind of what other kind of domestic issues that people are focusing on. Of course, at this election, China is not going to be the only factor. There are really key issues that Taiwan's economy is facing. Taiwan has a very low birth rate, has serious demographic issues, housing issues, but it really has to be said that in some way these issues, at a presidential election especially, in some way are shaded by this relationship that Taiwan has with China. And that is why, if you think that Taiwan not only faces this military threat from Beijing, but it has its kind of largest trading and economic relationship with China as well, you get a sense of how difficult it really is to kind of tease out those questions and why the shadow of Beijing looms so large over Taiwanese presidential elections.
Always an interesting time in Taiwan when it comes to elections, people having to decide when it comes to candidates, the international considerations in addition to the domestic considerations. James Chater, thank you so much for joining us.